lot of people think when they've got a plastic boat, it's not going to corrode. So where are the key areas you would direct people to check regularly on their own boat for the kind of corrosion that will come up and surprise you if you don't look for it regularly?
Well, we've talked about skin fittings, and they're absolutely essential. And I would say that's an annual thing. Just go around and tap them with a hammer. Go up the mast once a year. A lot of masts have stainless steel fittings, and of course you can get galvanic reaction between the aluminium and the stainless steel. And just look around the perimeter of the fittings to see if you can see corrosion bubbling out. If it is, that fitting ought to come off, and see what the condition is underneath it. If it's a keel step mast, again, once a year, lift the collar, and if there's one place that's really vulnerable on a keel stepped aluminium mast, it's where it goes through the deck. I'm not quite sure why, but I've got a theory, and I think it may be associated with the electrical supply onto the mast. If there's a slight electrical leak, that'll be conducted onto the mast section in the rain or wet weather. That will earth at the mast partners, and as it earths, that'll start some electrolytic corrosion. But I've taken collars off masts, and I've been able to poke my finger through. So do look at that on an annual basis. In terms of protection with anodes, be careful what you bond to what. You would use a single hull anode to protect your stern gear, but don't also use that same anode to bond into the keel, because when that hull anode's gone, the keel will start looking around for some other source of protection, and it may use your stern gear. And I've seen a sail drive disappear just about because its anode, its hull anode, which was giving it good protection, was also bonded to the keel. The hull anode vanished, and the keel just said, "Oh, I'll use the sail drive next as my anode."
So look regularly, check regularly is really the message there, isn't it?
Yes, and also on the engine. The engine's made up of lots of different bits of metal. There are anodes in a lot of engines. A competent service engineer will change those every year, but if you're going to sail off into the wide blue yonder, you may not be dealing with people who have that knowledge. So familiarise yourself with the anodes in your engine if it's got them, and carry spares there. Just a quick note, if I may, if you buy an aluminium or a steel yacht, then look internally. The corrosion doesn't really happen from the outside, and the ultrasound survey doesn't necessarily find the corrosion, because the corrosion on a steel yacht's going to happen in puddles along the top of the stringers. So arrange your boat so that you can get to the inside and just make that annual inspection as well, just to make sure you've not got aggressive corrosion. And the same again with aluminium. An aluminium boat doesn't oxidize and corrode through. It'll be again galvanic or electrolytic action, but only in a tiny little area. And that area can go right through. It'll be something like having dropped a penny in the bilges, and that'll set up the reaction. It could be anything, but just make the annual inspection on the internal surfaces.
Good stuff, thank you. We're going to move on now and take a look at rigging, which is, remember you are sailing boats, it is the most important part of your boat after the hull. We need rig and sails to get us to places, so we're going to take a quick overview of some pointers on your rig.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our rigging expert, Robin Millage, was unable to come today, so you got me again, I'm afraid. I will field questions as well as I can, and between Jim and the rest of us, I'm sure we can answer any question you might have. Alternatively, at the end of this, there are our email addresses, and if you have any specialist questions that you'd like to put to our rigging specialist, Robin, his email address is in there, so please do take it down and send him an email. There are various rig types. Cutter and sloop are probably the most common you'll see now, followed by ketch. The cutter rig gives the benefit of an inner head sail, which can be an advantage if you're running downwind with poled out twin head sails. A sloop has the single head sail, and therefore installing an inner forestay for a storm jib is very much worth considering for heavier weather. With rigging wire, 1x19 wire, as it's called, is the most common you'll see on vessels. The diform is a more advanced wire. It's a compact winding. It means that you can reduce, for the same strength, you can go to a lower wire diameter. It costs perhaps 50 to 60% more than standard wire, but very good for reducing weight aloft if you have any weight concerns. So it's definitely worth considering when you are re-rigging, particularly if you're changing configuration things, to look at that as a stronger option for the same wire size. 7x7 and 7x19 wires are not so commonly seen on modern vessels. It's a more flexible wire, and often if you do have wire halyards, it's the sort of wire that would be used for that. It's more flexible. It can bend over sheaves through the mast. It can also be coiled up, so it's used for strops and that sort of thing. Swage terminals are the norm. They are a hydraulically compressed fitting. It's secure and reliable and lower cost relative to swageless fittings. Many Bluewater cruisers do move away from swage fittings as they are a specialist task. They require a hydraulic swaging machine in order to do them, which means that a repair will need to be done by a specialist, and you may be many miles away from a hydraulic swaging machine. So the other option is to go to swageless terminals. Norseman is perhaps the household name in swageless terminals. It was originally by Gibb, and then Navtec took them over, but Navtec no longer make them. So Staylock has sort of taken over as a good UK-made swageless fitting, but there are other brands available as well. They are a mechanical termination. You can see the breakdown hopefully in the middle there. And it's something that can be done anywhere. So it can be done by yourselves, and it can be done by any rigger in any port. It's worth carrying spares because obviously with different sizing and that sort of thing, if you do pull into a yard, a local rigger may not have in stock, and then you may have lead time issues. So again, it's something worth adding to your spares list.
On a point on that, are they reusable?
They can be reused by chain, but you use new cones on the inside.
On that point, if you've got swaged fittings and that's going to go, if you carry stain-on ones, can you transfer across?
No, not often the case, because the swage fitting will take a few inches of your wire. In order to cut off the swage fitting,
Replace them.
you could potentially add a new wire with it. Otherwise, you'd end up too short.
Yeah, sure, but if the wire presumably is common, so if you carried stain-on fittings, you can.
Yeah, fair point. So if you carry them on, and a rigger elsewhere would have the wire. Yeah, good point. When you have your survey done on the vessel, surveyors will often limit their inspection of the rig to eye level. They won't generally go aloft. So a surveyor will often recommend that you have a specialist rig survey done. At Berthon and other rigging specialists, we're able to do that. And it can be done with the mast in situ on the boat, or with the mast out on the hard. If it's done in situ, certainly at Berthon, we wouldn't go aloft with the boat ashore for health and safety reasons. So it's worth doing that before the boat is lifted ashore. So just worth bearing in mind for one of the earlier jobs, so that if any work does need to be done or parts need to be ordered, it can be done while the boat's ashore, rather than a sudden panic when you've launched and want to go on sea trial. We would give you, by going aloft, we check all the areas. Every single item of standing rigging, the spars, the boom, the running rigging, sheaves, pins, everything is given an inspection. There are other options for non-destructive testing, such as ultrasound and dye testing. So if there are problem areas particularly on bigger vessels where the cost to replace the rigging is significant, you may then look at alternate testing methods on areas of concern. This is just, obviously you can't read all the headings, but that's an example of a rig inspection. There's 120 points depending on what applies to your vessel. So we would do this. The riggers go up the mast and literally go through every single item, checking for signs of crevice corrosion in fittings, any dents in the mast or boom, compression at the spreader roots and fittings. If there's a bend in the mast, any loose fittings or broken wires, they should all be picked up from a visual inspection. This just an example of rigging faults. This is a swage with a crack in it. Obviously that's something that's been picked up, so that would result in replacing the wire. It is worth mentioning at this point that with a swaged fitting such as this, the wire isn't gripped for the first few millimeters inside the swage. So if looking for a broken wire, that's an extreme on the left there, you may not be able to see it through visual inspection. It might be within the swage that it's broken. That's a difficult one, and that we'll talk in a moment about when to replace standing rigging, so that's something that comes in there. Other items here you can see are a damaged masthead sheave, which would wear your halyards quite seriously. And also there is a masthead tang, which unfortunately with the photo being quite faint, it is actually has a crack going all the way through it. So obviously by picking up items like that, that could be a catastrophic failure if it were to occur. So it's very important to make sure that the rig does have a very thorough inspection. So the rig report will highlight any repairs, give an opportunity to carry out upgrades, re-rigs and things before you go. There are other options, you know, if a boom has a dent in it or if there's any sign of stress, it's not necessarily as big a problem as it might seem. You can add double plates to reinforce and repair. And there's a photo of a boom there with a double plate where the vang attaches. People often ask the question of when standing rigging should be replaced. There are some very clear examples of when standing rigging should be replaced, and then perhaps some grey areas. So I'm just going to note at this point that it is could be a matter of boat and crew safety. It could be catastrophic if you were to lose your rig. So if you are at any point in any doubt, change your rigging. It should be done by doing it here. You can deal with someone who speaks the same language. You can get the right parts for the boat. It will be done promptly, and you go away with the peace of mind then that everything is as good as it can be. Trying to get items of rigging replaced in other countries can lead to challenges, particularly for parts, and also if you don't speak the same language in the same way, it can just add to a challenge. Other reasons why you may replace the standing rigging. So if obviously you do the rig inspection and any failures come up, if a couple of your wires are in bad condition, it's certainly worth replacing all of them. They would have seen the same loads and the same use. If history of the boat dictates it, so if you know that the boat that you're buying has already been across the Atlantic a couple of times or around the world, and you don't know that the rigging has been replaced since then I'd strongly advise that it is replaced, because it is completely unknown. Obviously, if you're looking at upgrading the size or rig configuration, then that's a time that you would change it as well. Insurance companies, people talk about age. Age is a difficult one. Insurance companies have clauses against failure due to wear and tear. Wear and tear is something that you can't necessarily monitor, especially with rigging when on visual inspection it passes. But the risk there is if you were to have a failure, obviously your insurance company is there to cover the damage that occurs. And if they have a clause against wear and tear, it may be very difficult for you to claim for you to prove that it was an accidental failure rather than a failure due to wear and tear. So it is a difficult one, and often when surveyors or yards are aware that you're going to be going blue water cruising, crossing the Atlantic, if you know that the rig's 10 or 12 years old, then you will probably be recommended to replace it. So it's just something to worth considering. Like I said before, if in any doubt at all, then change it. So there's various adaptations I think we talked about earlier on, so I won't talk too much on this, but you'd be doing a lot of downwind sailing when doing the arc. So options you need to consider for sailing downwind. Many recommend the twin head sail with poles to hold them out, and as mentioned earlier, by having the pole on a 4.5 guys and a topping lift means that it keeps the pole in place. You're able to easily furl and adjust the sail, but it also means it doesn't bounce around as you're going through the sea as the boat rolls. Bouncing around pole is adding wear to the fittings, to the sail and halyards and so on. If you're looking at twin poles, you do need to consider how you'll support them to the mast, and also look at options for mounting the guys easily. So it's worth considering beforehand and testing. If that isn't an option and you're looking at using a spinnaker for downwind sailing, spinnakers do tend to need a bit more adjustment as you're going along. And also, if you're using the mainsail, as mentioned earlier, that by using twin poled out head sail, you can bring the main down. If you're relying a lot on the main and a single head, it can cause the boat to slew, and it's not such a comfortable ride.
Sorry, can you go through that again? The twin head sails and the main.
If you're using twin head sails, I think it was recommended earlier that you would actually bring the main down. Whereas if you're using just a single head sail and you're still using the main, it just affects the characteristics of the boat, and it's perhaps a more comfortable downwind ride to just rely on twin head sails without a mainsail. There's just a photo of a poled out head sail. You probably can't see it, but it's held up with a topping lift and then supported 4.5 by guys. So storm sails and inner emergency forestays. A lot of vessels are already equipped with emergency inner forestays, and they will be often removable, so they're strapped to the mast, but then you pull them out to an eye in the deck in the event that you need them. At the time that you would be using a storm sail or an emergency inner forestay, it's going to be in very heavy winds, big seas, possibly even a lee shore. So it's important that it works, it's important that it's fitted properly. So make sure you test it beforehand and make sure you know how the sail goes on. If you are having an emergency an inner forestay fitted, it isn't simply a case of bolting a pad eye to the deck. You need to make sure that the deck is structurally able to take the loadings, so ensure that the yard thinks seriously about how to add that structure to the deck and for installing the eye. Often hanked-on storm jibs are seen on vessels, but there's no means to attach them. If you've got a hanked-on sail, there is no way of attaching that over the furling head sail. So it is worth just testing as soon as you can how you would actually raise that sail that may come with the boat. So just check that beforehand. Wear and tear and chafe is the long-distance sailor's worst enemy. It's important to reduce it wherever you possibly can. There's many ways that you can look at chafe. So if the sheets are rubbing on a particular part of your rig, for example, or guard wire, then consider putting leather over the sheet. If you're going to be running in the same rig configuration for a long time, so if you're going downwind for a long time, it might be worth running an outboard Genoa sheet so that it isn't wearing on the guard wires. It will quite quickly wear through. It's worth just adjusting all your sheets and halyards so they're not always wearing on the same point. You can end for end them, so just mouse them out, turn them around, so that again they're not wearing in the same position, or by cutting a metre off if you do have some wear points, will move the point that it's wearing to another area. Another tip is to run an external spinnaker halyard if you're using the spinnaker for your downwind running. The spinnaker halyard will wear on the slot liners for where it enters the mast, so and that can cause wear to the liners and to the halyard. So by running one externally, it reduces that risk. So routine checks and maintenance. If you're at sea for 20 days, particularly if you're downwind, you'll have a lot of time available each day. So get in the routine of regular and thorough checking of your rig and all other deck components. So you're looking for, if you're on the same tack for a long period, you should check the leeward shrouds just to make sure that they're not too slack. If they are too slack, there is risk that the pins could fall out, which you won't find until you're then on the other tack and things aren't attached. It's also worth obviously checking for chafe, as I mentioned, just casting an eye over every aspect of the rig configuration just to make sure that things aren't experiencing chafe. Check your halyards and just regularly walk around and just keep an eye out to make sure. Carry spare sheets and halyards with you should you need them, but obviously it's better to reduce that wear in the first place. If you think that 20 days crossing the Atlantic is 480 hours of constant load on the sails and rig, if you compare that to perhaps an average inshore sailor, that might equate to 3 months worth of wear in just one trip. So it is just worth making sure that you start off with everything in the best possible condition and keep it that way. Just a list there of spares that are worth carrying: halyards and sheets, mouse lines should you need to run out your halyards to replace them, spare blocks including snatch blocks, shackles, sheaves, selection of tapes. Everyone loves duct tape, good solution for repairing problems. But also carrying some strong Dyneema line, which can be used for lashings and is obviously very strong. So that concludes the rigging section. I've just brought up on the screen there some contact email addresses for myself, for Henry, who's our electronics manager here at Berthon. I know people do have queries on electronics and power generation things. Henry and I are also here on the stand should you want to come and talk to us today. And also there is the email address for my colleague Robin, who, as I said, he is our expert here at Berthon and will be happy to take any questions from you. So I hope it's been interesting for you, and I'd just like to wish you all good voyage and enjoy, and look forward to seeing you in the future, hopefully. Thank you.
Greg, Jim, thank you very much for your contributions. Lots to think about there. 2 points to make. As cruisers, you're always learning. So never lose sight of that fact. And a lot of stuff we've talked about over this weekend is part of the knowledge process for getting you on your boats and getting sailing. Don't necessarily think you need to worry about all of that all of the time. Once you've got your boat and you're out there doing, your priorities will change, and then you'll be focusing on the kind of things that Greg's been talking about, and particularly Jim, with it's much more about the daily living with your boat and managing it that way. So hopefully it hasn't been information overload. We've tried to give you an overview and hopefully help you set some of your priorities for what's going to work on your boats, and thinking about your own cruising aspirations and plans. So hope we've achieved that. Thank you very much for your attention, everyone. The open boats are running until 4 o'clock, so if you didn't get a chance to go down and chat to people and look over the boats yesterday, the private boats are open until 4, and the brokers are here if you want to look at any of the brokerage boats, even if it's just comparing their setups with yours. They're very happy to show you, and that's really what we're there for, is looking at boats and learning. So thank you to all of you. We're still around. The lunch van is here, so you're very welcome to grab some lunch and have a chat with us if you want to pick our brains a bit more quietly outside the presentation room. So thank you to all of you. Look forward to seeing you down the road on board your boats. And remember, yesterday I put up that picture of that anchorage. Keep that picture in your mind, because that's where we want to be. Everything else we've talked about is just to get us into that bay on that anchorage. So don't lose sight of that picture. And as the guy said, bon voyage. Thank you.